Hello, everyone. I'm the product specialist from Demonstrated Success, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar on viewing data in iPlatform. We're happy to have you with us today. I'd like to introduce Mike Schwartz, our president and founder of Demonstrated Success. He will be your presenter today. I'm here to answer your questions as Mike moves through the presentation. Before we start, I'd like to draw your attention to the control panel so you know where our polling is and how to ask questions and get our handouts. Just FYI, everyone on the webinar is on mute to avoid interrupting noise. But if you have any questions, please type it in. Our handouts are at the bottom of our control panel, if you just look towards the bottom. At the end of the webinar, if you have any questions, feel free to stay on and we can unmute and chat. And please remember that this webinar is recorded and posted on our Demonstrated Success resource site in case you want to rewatch the webinar. Mike, it's all yours.
Thank you, India, and thank you everybody for attending. As India mentioned, some of the presentation itself and some handouts are posted in the control panel of GoToMeeting. So please go take a look at that if you want to have the PowerPoint or follow along separately. Additionally, I want to point out that the resources are also stored, as India mentioned, on our Demonstrated Success website. And so I'm just going to take a quick sidetrack to show you that. So if you go to demonstratedsuccess.com and you click on member login, you may have to create a login if you don't already have one. But when you go here, you won't see this screen, but if you will go to a resources and discussion page, and if you select the professional development resources, all our workshops and webinars are stored here. So any of the educators in New Hampshire have access to this. You can go back and record or view the recording of webinars. You know, if other staff in your schools want to view this webinar, they can do that. Great way to earn some professional development without any cost. So we highly recommend you taking a look at this. There's some great webinars and workshop documents on things like understanding the SAT. There are webinars on things such as PLC practices, science data, modular or benchmark assessments, NHSAS. So a lot of good resources if you haven't already seen these webinars or been attending these workshops. So highly recommend it. Today, as India mentioned, we're going to be talking, oh, I'm sorry, the other thing I wanted to make sure everybody was aware of, there's some other great webinars coming up. So in addition to today's webinar on iPlatform, we've got one coming up next week on leveraging the SAT data. There's a webinar on creating local assessments, implementing tiered interventions, types of data and purposes of different school teams, NHSAS data. We're going to be repeating a webinar on NHSAS. And then also one on reporting data to school boards and communities. So all of these are available. They're posted on our website as well under webinars and workshops, and there's registration links there. So again, please share this with staff, and we hope you can attend some of these other webinars as well. Also, in addition to a full day or a half day workshop we did today on iPlatform, we've got one coming up on NHSAS benchmark assessments. And I can't stress enough, we can't stress enough how valuable it is for both students as well as teachers to spend some time working with the NHSAS benchmark assessments, really to get a much better understanding of the standards and the content that folks should be teaching in New Hampshire based on the New Hampshire standards. So anyway, a lot of good resources. But today we're going to be focusing on iPlatform. And there are kind of three goals today. The first goal is we're going to spend a little bit of time doing some background and getting everybody kind of hopefully on the same page around ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, and the way that our plan for ESSA in New Hampshire creates this idea of school accountability and certain indicators that are used for school accountability. iPlatform is built on the indicators and the information that has been defined as part of our New Hampshire's response to the Every Student Succeeds Act. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll dive into iPlatform and iExplorer. So let me start with the background. So the ESSA plan identified categories of schools to hold schools accountable and identify schools that might be struggling or need some additional support. And there's three main categories. And so the assessment data from the assessment results are kind of the primary source for helping determine the school accountability, along with other factors like graduation rate and English language access scores and a variety of other things that I'll talk briefly about as well. But the three categories of schools that assessments are used to help identify are schools that are CSI, and that stands for Comprehensive Support and Improvement. And those are schools those are the bottom 5%, or the 5% of the schools in the state that seem to be struggling the most in terms of student learning. And so in New Hampshire, 5%, because we've got a small state, it's not a lot of schools. And for elementary, it's 12 schools, because these are just Title I schools. So 5% of our Title I schools account for 12 schools. And so they're the 12 schools that seem to be struggling the most educating all students for CSI. It's all students. CSI and ATS both deal with subgroups of students. So both of those are looking at schools that are struggling with certain subpopulations, whether it's special ed or free and reduced population or certain race and ethnicity. Those are the schools that are identified for either TSI or ATS. And I'm not going to talk a lot about the differences between those two as well, but if there are any questions, feel free to ask. The data that's used for iPlatform and is used for determining CSI and all the other school statuses as well are all is primarily data that's either the assessment data taken through either the NHSAS or the DLM assessment or the SAT assessment, or it's data that's submitted for each student from schools. So it's data that's submitted both through the I4C system that many of you may be familiar with, and this is data that every school submits to the Department of Education, either in what's called like a beginning of the year file, a BOI file, or a class submission in the middle of the year, saying what classes are being taught in your school, what teachers are teaching what classes, and what students are in those classes, or something like a college and career readiness submission that submits for every student information about whether that student is a state scholar or whether that student has a certification in something like plumbing, as an example, as well as other submissions. So all the data that's submitted to the department is then used to populate iPlatform. So when you're looking at the iPlatform data, really you're looking at data that your school submitted and has been pulled together with other data to then provide a display or kind of a profile of schools. So I just want to make sure you understand where the source of the data was. Having said that, there's frequently confusion about why the data in iPlatform might not match data that you're seeing in some other system. And I'll talk a little bit about that later, but for now, let me just suffice to say that when you submit all the data to us, when we're reporting it for different purposes, we might only be pulling certain students. So for example, in iPlatform, we might only be pulling students who are in your school for at least 90% of the year. Whereas you might have submitted data for a student who joined your school in February, that student may not be included when you're looking at the percent of students proficient in your school in iPlatform. Because in iPlatform, we're only looking at students who are in your school at least 90% of the year. The data that's pulled from this I4C system, from all the assessment tests, are available to you in many places. iPlatform is the one we're going to focus on today, but I just want to make sure you're aware that it's also, this data is also available at College Board, for example. There's some great data available for the SAT that you can actually drill down to the item level for many of the items and look at how students are performing. In the ORS system, that's part of the system that manages the state assessment, the grades 3 through 8 state assessment test. That's a place where you're going to get the data immediately as soon as possible for state assessment. And there you can look at both aggregate and student level data. The iPlatform is a system that we're looking at today that is public. So this is all going to be aggregate data, summaries of students counts within your schools. Performance Plus, which the state helps sponsor, but local schools can purchase, has multiple assessment data at the student level. The I4C Workbench has some raw files, meaning spreadsheets of all your students or all your aggregate results. And so much of the data is available there. And then on the DOE website. If you're interested in learning about the data in any of these, send us an email and we can help explain if it's not something you're aware of and it's something you want to learn a little bit more about. I've also posted on the control panel in GoToMeeting a handout that describes each one of these. So take a look at that handout as well if you've got any questions. Okay, so let's get into iPlatform. So iPlatform was created for several reasons. The current commissioner and the directors within the department wanted to help better take the data that's been received through these different systems and make it available to the public, make it available to schools, to parents, to legislatures. They wanted to do it just in one to help make education more transparent, make sure everybody really gets a good understanding of how schools are doing and the successes in schools and the areas that schools are focusing on. They wanted it to be public, and so the data is all aggregate. So that not only means that you're not seeing individual student data, it also means that if you have less than 11 students in your school or less than 11 students in a subgroup, that data will be suppressed. You won't see it. So for very small schools, you'll see some overall data, but you won't be able to drill to different subgroups because of that need for privacy. iPlatform was created to meet the ESSA requirements. So the Every Student Succeed Act requires the states to display this information. And so the department used this tool, although you'll see this tool includes both iReport and iExplorer. And we'll look at that in more detail later, but it goes beyond what was required by the federal government to try to provide even more support, more information to parents and schools and stakeholders in New Hampshire. iReport iPlatform was developed to help you compare. So it lets you take multiple schools and compare one school to the other, and not for the real purpose of trying to learn from each other and identify certain schools that you might want to reach out to get some more information about what they're doing, because maybe they have a similar demographic, but they're doing a little bit better in the assessment results, and so it might be a school that you'd want to reach out and learn more about. And another example might be that there is a school that has a very high free and reduced rate, like your school may have, but might be doing better, or not doing better, but being very successful in whether it's student assessment results or maybe even class size or something. And therefore, it's a school that you want to reach out to learn what they're doing to make their class size smaller, if that's something that you're looking to do, or if they are doing very well in the assessment test. And you'll see throughout the tool, ease of access was something that was important. And so hopefully you'll find that this tool is fairly easy to manipulate and to get around. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, the tool meets some federal requirements around providing the data and the results for the assessments. But it also includes science, for example, which is not something that's used for accountability. It has to break out the assessment results in all the major demographic areas like race, gender, economic status, English language learners, foster students. That's part of the ESSA requirements. But it also includes information around spending. So you'll be able to look at assessment results compared to tax rate, or assessment results compared to cost per student. In addition to schooling information, so you'll be able to look at assessment results compared to class size or compared to staff ratio. So the concept is it gives you more information and ability to look not only at correlations or relationships between different factors, but also look longitudinally over time for certain factors as well. Oh, there was a question, I'm sorry, about where this information comes from around spending. And so, as I mentioned earlier, really, I think all this information either comes from assessment test or data that's provided by the schools. And so schools actually submit to the department your budget information, including things like your revenue and expenses, as well as through the ESS system, which is the Education Statistics System. You submit things such as your staff student ratio. You submit data such as the number of students who had significant disciplinary actions for things like, disciplinary actions for things like violent behavior or bringing in guns or those types of things. Those come through the ESS survey. So all the information, again, comes from data that's provided by the schools. So now let me talk a little bit more about ESSA itself. And so I'm going to refer you all to the department's website. I want to make sure you're aware of this document that really spells out everything that's displayed in, most of what's displayed in the iPlatform. And so if you go to the education.nih.gov website, I'm just going to do that just to show you. So I go to the main education.nih.gov website. If you scroll down on the right under quick links, you'll see about the 5th link down, it says Every Student Succeeds Act. And if you click on that, you'll then see, if you scroll down just a little bit, something called the New Hampshire Consolidated Plan. So every state in the country that receives federal funds for education has to meet the Every Student Succeed Act. The act required that each state come together with a plan on how they're going to hold schools accountable. So this is New Hampshire's plan. And so I actually encourage you to take a look at this when you're trying to understand the data in iPlatform or some indicators that are used for determining schools' status like CSI and TSI. This document lays out exactly how all that happens. And so one of the things we're going to talk about in a minute is the fact that there are these different indicators or targets that schools have to achieve in rating schools for accountability. And so if you go to page, I believe it's 21, I think, in this, let me find out here. Yeah, 21. Page 21 in this document outlines the targets for math and ELA performance. And so we're going to see, and actually, let me scroll back to the PowerPoint for a minute. We're going to see that in iPlatform, you'll see what percentage of your students were proficient in English language arts, and you'll see that how you compare to the state target. So in this case, the state target is 60.45. So this target was defined in this plan right here. And so actually, I should even be able to do this. If we're looking at, if we're looking at English language arts and the target, it looks like it's 60.45. I'm not sure which year this is for, but assuming it's like 2019, we should see for ELA, it's, what did I say it was? 60.45. So it looks like maybe this was 2017 target. So that I captured on the screen chart. So this target, in terms of how well the school's doing compared to a target, the target is defined in the state ESSA plan. I'm going to back a slide up for just 1 second and mention that in that ESSA plan, there are targets, and those are the targets I just described, and there's targets for things like assessment results. There's also what's called indicators, and so the indicators are the items that are used to determine the CSI and TSI status for schools. And then there's the overall ranking that is determined based on those indicators. The targets are not used to determine CSI or TSI schools. The targets are used in our reporting, but they're not used to determine the status. The status is determined by the indicators. And so now if I go to this next slide, we can talk, as I mentioned a second ago, these targets are defined starting on page 21. There are targets both for the overall school. So, the hope is 60% of the kids are proficient in ELA as an example. There's also targets that you'll see on the ESSA plan starting on page 23 for subgroups. So there's targets on what a certain subgroup, whether it's special education or whether it's limited English proficient subgroup, how they should be, what percentage of that subgroup should be proficient. And this is a nice improvement from No Child Left Behind. For those of you who remember No Child Left Behind, the target for all kids, all subgroups was 100%. In a period of a certain number of years, 100% of the kids were supposed to be proficient on the assessment. In reality, it was obvious that wasn't going to work, and that wasn't reality. Here in this plan, there's targets that are different for each subgroup, as well as the overall student population. So again, I encourage you to look at those, and as you're looking at iProfile and you see a target, if you want to understand more about what that target is and where it came from, the ESSA plan will tell you that. Indicators, as I mentioned, are the items that are used to determine CSI and TSI status. Though the definition of the indicators are also in that New Hampshire Consolidated Plan, and they start on page 31. So again, if you go to the plan, and I'm not going to, I won't walk you through the details of it, but on page 31, and those are all the targets we're just scrolling through. On page 31, it starts talking about the indicators right here. So these indicators are defined here as well. So again, I encourage you to look at the document to learn more about how they were calculated. There are 4 indicators for elementary school, and there are 4 indicators for high school. So for elementary school, the first indicator is academic achievement. So the plan, and again, what's displayed in the iPlatform, counts on or looks at the percentage of students who are proficient in using the NHSAS or the DLM or the PACE test in elementary school, and using the SAT or the DLM in high school. The second indicator, and again, you'll see these indicators in iPlatform, that's what I want to talk about here. The second indicator for elementary school is the growth percentile. And I won't go into much detail about growth percentile here, but again, if you've got questions about it, ask now or ask it, email me at a later date. But the growth percentile basically is saying it's a factor that's used to help identify how students are improving from year to year, regardless of whether they're strong students or students that are struggling. And so, growth percentile, for example, if I'm somebody who's been struggling for years, it will tell me, how did I do this year on the assessment based on other kids who were like me last year struggling? So of all the kids who were like me last year, struggling last year, did I grow the fastest and the most, and I performed the best this year of all those kids who were like me in the last year, and so I'd be in the 100th, 99th percentile, or of all the kids who were struggling last year, did I struggle even more than them this year? I didn't do very well at all this year, and so I'd be a 1% or 2% or a small number in terms of my growth percentile. It does the same thing with kids who are high achievers and kids who are in the middle. So it's a good means to identify how your students are improving based on students who are similar to them in the prior year. And the mean growth percentile just means that it takes for every student in your school, the system identifies what each individual student growth percentile was. So how did Mike do compared to other people like Mike last year around the state? How did Susan do compared to other people that were like Susan last year? How did all those kids who were like Susan last year, how did she do compared to them this year across the entire state? And it identifies the growth percentile for each one of your students, and then it puts together a mean, an average of all those growths. So that's the second indicator for elementary schools. The third indicator looks at English learners proficiency, English learner proficiency, and it looks at a growth factor for them as well. So it's done very similar to what I described about the mean growth percentile for the overall students. It does the same thing using the access test. And so the access test, which is administered by WIDA, is for English language learners. And it does a similar factor to say, of all your English language learners in your school, how did they improve compared to other kids? And it actually looks around the nation. So it's telling you how did they grow compared to other kids around the nation. And then the fourth indicator for elementary schools is your school quality or your equity indicator. And this basically is an indicator that tries to create equity for the kids who are struggling. And so it uses a mean growth percentile similar to what I described as the second item, but it puts emphasis on the kids who are struggling in your school. And it uses a formula to say, for all the kids who are struggling, how did they grow? And let's weight their growth much more than the rest of the school. And then it looks at your school compared to other schools around the state. And so it comes up with an equity factor to see how you're growing your struggling students compared to how other schools in the state are growing their struggling students. And again, the description of how that calculation is created is in the ESSA plan. For high schools, the achievement is, as I mentioned earlier, it's the SAT test. Rather than looking at growth, because you can't, because they're in high school, we only have assessed 1 year, so you can't look at growth because there's only 1 year of data. So instead, we look at graduation rate, and it uses this is kind of a combined average between your 4 and your 5 year graduation rates. And again, we don't have time right now, but I'm happy to talk more about that at a later date. ELP growth is the same as we said for elementary. And then rather than this equity indicator, the last indicator that's used is the CCR, or the College and Career Readiness Indicator. And that's identifying of all your students who are in grade 12, how many of them are ready for college and career. And it uses, it identifies about 12 or 13 different characteristics that of students that help determine whether they're ready. Those characteristics are things such as, did they pass an AP test at a 3 or above, and so they're indicating they're ready for college, or do they have a industry recognized credential in something like plumbing or something to that effect, in which case it's helping identify that they're ready for college or career, or do they have I forget the name of the assessment, but it's the military assessment that indicates that they're ready again for college and career. So there's several factors, and if a student, this is identifying what percentage of your students have at least 2 of those characteristics that they've achieved. So all of these again are displayed and available in iPlatform, both as indicators and the target information. And so at this point, what I'd like to do is jump into iPlatform, because I know we don't have a lot of time. So if you have downloaded the PowerPoint, or if you download it at a later point, the next few slides walk you through iPlatform. But rather than going through the PowerPoint right now, I'm going to jump over to iPlatform itself, and we are going to take a look. We're going to take a look right on the line and explore iPlatform in real time. So I'm going to go ahead. I go to the education.nh.gov website, and on the left side, you'll see there's actually iPlatform is the one about the 6th or 7th bullet down, and then there's also a graphic for iPlatform a little further down. You can click on either one, and this opens up iPlatform, or this brings you to the iPlatform main page on the department's website. For those of you who are Harry Potter fans, 9.75 version 9.7 of iPlatform was an appreciation of Harry Potter. I personally, unfortunately, not a Harry Potter reader, but I guess 9 3/4 is a reference to Harry Potter. So a little trivia for those of you who didn't notice it. iReport. So iPlatform includes iReport and iExplorer. It also includes iDefine. We're not going to spend much time on that, but this is just, iDefine is just basically a dictionary, a data dictionary that explains the different data elements that are submitted by schools to the department. So you can just learn what data is submitted to the department and when. But we're going to look at iReport and iExplorer. That's where you can actually analyze the information about schools. So iReport's the first one which I clicked on. You can go, when you first go into it, it asks you to specify a school or district that you want to look at. So I'm going to just type in Portsmouth Middle School, and we'll take a look at Portsmouth. You can type in any school or district. And it brings you to a landing page that provides a profile of that school. And you'll notice here I can go 2018-19, and I can also look at 2017-18 data. Now this is the second year that iPlatform is in existence. And as we move forward, you'll be able to continue to look back at prior years. The profile page gives you overall information about the school, so their address and who the principal is, and the district name. It gives you student enrollment, breaks it down by some different subcategories, and then also gives different student populations. So what percentage of the school is economically disadvantaged, what percentage are English language learners, students with disabilities. Again, all this data really comes from the schools. So it includes, the 531 students is the number of students that were submitted by Portsmouth Middle School in its I4C, is the system that you submit data to the department. And the I4C has a beginning of year submission. This is the number of students that were submitted as enrolled in your school on October 1st in your beginning of year file. The economically disadvantage comes from data that you submit to the department and through what's called a FNR, free and reduced submission. The other thing I should point out is if you see less than 10, or you see an N with a star, both of these indicate that there's is a way to protect the data because there's too few students. So less than 10 is just a way to protect the students because there's a small number of students. And N with a star also is a protection because there's less than 10 students in that subgroup. I believe NA means that it either means that the data, that there's no students, or maybe that we don't have the data yet for that. And then finally on the profile page, it lists any programs that might be offered in that school. And X actually means that the program is not offered. So this is actually an area that the department's going to be making some fixes to the system to make it more clear. There's a couple of, I guess, concerns that other folks have expressed. One is that people might not know what a 21st century school is. That doesn't mean that you're a modern school. It means that you have a 21st century after school program. That's a federally funded after school care program. And the other problem is full day kindergarten shouldn't even be showing up here because we're looking at a middle school. A middle school is defined as an elementary school in New Hampshire, and so it's showing up because it thinks it's an elementary school. In fact, Portsmouth does have full day kindergarten if you look at one of its elementary schools. But if you have any questions about those types of things, again, let us know. There was a question of whether the students with disabilities information comes from the NESA system, and the answer is yes to that. It does come from the NESA system. Thank you for asking that. So that's the profile. You then can look at an overview, and an overview is going to give us information about achievement, growth, environment, and educator profiles. So this is a great, easy way to find out some overall information about how the school, the makeup of the school and the performance of the school. Those 4 areas are displayed here in these 4 boxes. Student achievement presents your English, your math, and your science assessments. And this is strictly the state assessment test. It's showing you the percentage of students proficient. You'll see that there is a green check mark here. That means that this school was in the top 25% of schools around the state in terms of the percent of students proficient. So that's obviously a good thing. The second area that's shown here is growth. And here for English language arts, their mean growth percentile was 49, and the mathematics mean growth percentile was 53. So from a school perspective, that is something that they may want to focus on. Basically, the growth percentile, if you're the 50th growth percentile, then it means you're growing on average, the same, about average for the state. So it means that there are, half the state is doing a little bit better than you, and half the state's doing a little bit worse in terms of how your kids are growing from year to year, regardless of how strong the child is. So this might be something that the Portsmouth Middle School wants to focus on and look, to see if there are ways that they can improve the growth of all their students. Obviously, everybody should be doing that. And to be honest, 49 and 53rd is not anything necessarily to be super concerned about. But if it was lower, it's something that obviously you want to be more concerned about. Oh, there's a question of why this is not. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on, I'm reading the question here. Oh, yeah, so this is the median growth. So this is the average growth. I'm sorry, median, but the mean, the average growth of all the students for ELL in that school. School environment. So school environment for this school is showing us the number of students who are receiving in-school suspensions. So there are 3.34% of students have an in-school suspension, 2.95 have an out-of-school suspension. There's no expulsions, and there are only 7 incidents of safe and disciplinary acts. And then average class size. Average class size, I think right now might only be available at the district level, not at the school level. And then there's also some information about the educator profile. So 95% of the students are in classes that are taught by an experienced educator. So it appears that in Portsmouth Middle School, most of the teachers have been teaching for at least 3 years. And that's one of the requirements to be experienced educator. This is based on whether you hold an EEC as opposed to a BEC or some other license, beginning educator certificate. So these are 95.7% of the teachers or students are being taught by a teacher who has an EEC, an experienced license. There are 91% of the students who are being taught by a teacher who's certified in the given subject. So as you know, there are sometimes teachers who are not certified in the subject they're teaching. And it also gives you the average cost. You can click Learn More to learn more about any one of these different indicators. You can also go under the overview and click on the specific area, and that'll bring you to the same place. So I'm going to go ahead and click Learn More about student achievement. And this is now going to give me more information about the English language arts, the math, and the science. And so once the page comes back, we'll see that now we see, not only do we see the percent proficient, we also see where you are compared to the state target. It also shows us trends over time, so you can see where you were the past 3 years or past 2 years, as well as this, the most recent year. You can also see how you are compared to your district in the state. I should point out that this is going to be fixed hopefully later this year, but the state and district average is not just showing middle school age students, it's showing all students. So although 71% of the middle school is proficient, this 56% includes high school students and includes third graders, fourth graders, fifth graders. So you're not exactly comparing apples and apples when you look at this. And then it also breaks it down by level. So for those 71% of the kids who are proficient, how many of them got level 4, how many of them got level 3, how many were level 2 and level 1. And you'll see there, because of rounding, we're seeing 45 and 25, but that must have a decimal point on each of them, because when you add them together, it came up to 71 when we looked at it here. And then there's also some participation information. Another thing I should point out is that these percent proficiencies are based on, as I mentioned earlier, only students who are in your school 90% of the time. And also, if your participation drops below 95%, then those students below, in excess of the 5%, any additional students that didn't take the test actually count against the school when you're coming up with your percent proficient. Those students actually count as if they were not proficient, like they were 0. So that can have some impact. There's very few schools. No, there's not a lot of schools that 95% that had less than 95% tested, and for those that did, hopefully there's not a significant difference, but be aware of that. If we look at, I'll just look at one more of these just to give you an idea, and then we'll move on. But school environment, for example, that also has some more detail in terms of looking across years and looking, versus the state average, et cetera. The other thing actually I meant to point out is if you look at achievement or growth or any of these, you'll see that there's also view details. View details will typically break out the information into more subcategories. So in this case, it's breaking it out into subgroups. So now I can see how the proficiency was for English language arts based on different subgroups, different race. You can also get down to the grade level. So here's where you would see grade level results. So realize that all that is available through the flyout. The flyouts are not always the same. So if I look, for instance, actually at school environment, and we look at suspensions, you'll see here the flyouts a little bit different. Here it's kind of telling me, in addition to demographic subgroups, it's also telling me how many kids miss 1 to 5 days, 6 to 10 days. So it looks like although 3% of the population was suspended, most of those suspensions, all those suspensions were for less than 5 days. Okay, so that's an update on, that's a little summary of the iPlatform, the iReport and the overview in the 4 sections. The last thing I just want to show you is the federal accountability on this iPlatform side. Here is where you can see those other indicators that I mentioned that are used to determine CSI and TSI. And so here we're seeing that for achievement, this school was considered a level 3. Level 1 is the lowest, level 4 is the best. And so you can kind of see where the school was in these different indicators. It looks like equity is an area that they want to be focusing on. If you click view details, it gives you that information broken down by subgroups. One of the things that I know folks have asked for is if possibly the actual value you could be included here. And so I suspect that'll be something in the future where you would know for achievement, you're level 3, and that's because you had 71% of your students or achievement is actually not really percent proficient, but it's your average proficiency. So that might mean that their average proficiency is a 3.1. Excuse me. Um, so those are the things that are available in iReport. And really, it's a nice, quick way to look at your overall assessment result and some other indicators about schools. The next thing I want to show you, I'll go back to the Education Department's main page. I'll go back to iPlatform, is iExplorer. So iExplorer allows us to start bringing in more variables. So iExplorer is going to focus not on things around suspension or some of those other items, but it's going to focus on achievement. And it's going to allow us to look at achievement as compared to other characteristics. There also is an area called compare and discover, and those actually allow us to look at factors even outside of achievement, or excluding achievement, but you'll see that in a minute. So iExplore, the explore part of it, allows us to explore different indicators. And so the main area to focus on is this indicator list right here. And so you can look at any one of these indicators, whether it's the classes taught by an experienced educator, or the average class size, or the cost per pupil, or maybe the graduation rate, any of these indicators, and you can see how are schools in the state or schools in my region doing on their assessments compared to this indicator. So as an example, I could look at, let's look at percent of economically disadvantaged students. So what this is now telling us is it's showing us, and it defaults to this map view, but I find it a little bit easier to look at a list view on the left side. So on the left side, it's just going to show us percent of economically disadvantaged. Here's a list from most school with the highest percentage of economically disadvantaged down to the school with below, further down here with the lowest percentage of economically disadvantaged. On the right, however, what it's plotting is it's plotting the average combined proficiency. So from here, from left to right, it's the percent of students who are proficient in math and ELA, the average percentage proficient across both math and ELA. And then up and from the bottom to the top, it's the percent of students in that school that are that have a low socioeconomic status, so living economically disadvantaged students. So the top right section of this graph are going to be schools that have high percent proficient and high percent of students who are economically disadvantaged. So these are schools up here who have a lot of students who are struggling, economically, but are doing well academically. And if we highlight one of these bubbles, for example, this is Wentworth School. This is Rumney. Here we got Bartlett. So these are all schools that seem to be doing very well from a proficiency perspective, despite the fact that they have a large population of socioeconomic students in poverty. Here's one way off to the right. This is Mason. They have 23% of their students are in economically disadvantaged, but they had very high assessment results. So good job for Mason. Wentworth is another example. 63% of their students are in economic hardship, yet they had 70% combined proficiency, very, very high. So again, this might be something where maybe you find when you look in iReport that you're struggling with your economically disadvantaged students, and so maybe you reach out to one of those schools to see if there's things you can learn. I imagine some of those schools are very small, so there might be other factors. You can also focus just on certain schools in the state. So right now I'm looking at all schools and all districts across all regions. Maybe I want to look at just the North Country, for example. So I can uncheck this, and I can then check the North Country. And now I'm going to see the same results, but I'm only going to see it for the North Country. And again, I can see now in the North Country, here's a school that has Bartlett has very high proficiency and also has a high economically disadvantage, but yet likely in a rural setting. So again, you can use these filters to limit the schools you want to look for. Same thing on this side. You can look at indicators at the district level or at the school level. I just realized we've been looking at 2016. Note you can also change the years, and so we might be looking at the more recent year, and so here we can see more recently, Lafayette. Here's Bartlett. So Bartlett is still doing pretty well, maybe not quite as well as they were before, but still doing very well despite their high percentage of students in poverty. Again, you can do this for lots of things. I could do this, for example, for let's say cost. Let's do class size. So let me do class size, and let me do all schools. And so here, this is an interesting graph. You might not have guessed this if you had thought about it before I showed it to you. But here we're looking at the percent proficiency versus the class size. And you would think as the class size increased, meaning these dots were higher up because they got higher class sizes, that their percent proficiency might go down. But in reality, you'll see that there's some very high class sizes that are doing very well. So Birch's Academic Charter School, or Mills Fall Charter School, so a couple of charter schools there, a lot of charter schools here. Wyndham, School District of Wyndham, Oyster River, Bedford. So Oyster River, for example, where they seem to have fairly high class size. They've got 21 students on average, but yet they're doing very well proficiency. Bedford is another example. So if you're having that debate within your school district of relationship between class size and academic success, this is one piece of information that may question that. Not to say this is, we don't know that there's a correlation. We can just see, that there's some type of relationship there. So certainly something that you might want to might want to help look at to educate the conversation. So I think I'll stop there with iExplorer, and let's talk a little bit about compare. And let me also just pause to see if there's any other questions right now. It looks like we're caught up right now. Okay, so in the compare tool, what it allows you to do is compare, just as it says, two districts or two schools. And you can take any indicator. So I could take an indicator such as cost per pupil as an example, and we can look at how both schools have changed over time and how they relate. So here's Bedford and Guilford, and so here, Bedford looks like their cost per pupil has been fairly low compared to Guilford, and here's the state average in the middle. The other nice thing about this tool is if you scroll further down, it gives you for all 4 years, both those schools, the actual value for all their indicators. So a nice way, again, to compare two schools, not for the purpose of determining better or worse, but for the purposes maybe of identifying schools that you think are comparators and see how they're doing, and then reach out to them to potentially learn and improve within your own school. So that's the compare tool. And then finally, the discover tool allows us to look at indicators outside of assessment results. I alluded to this earlier. So here, I can take a year, and let's look at 2019, for example. And I can take any two indicators, and for purposes of this example, let's take class size, and let's take, actually, let's look at this. Classes taught by an experienced educator. So this is somewhat interesting in the sense that if you look at this slope, although the correlation value is 0.12, we do see that there's some upward slope to say that as your class size goes up, typically you have more experienced educators. But again, you can limit that to a certain region. Maybe I want to look at the Lakes region, and again, you might want to find out other schools around me in the Lakes region. Here's a school that has a high percentage of teachers with experience and a large average class size. Here's one that's smaller. Maybe you want to look at the two of those and see if there's any differences that you might expect from those schools. Another example might be, rather than looking at experienced educators, which, most schools have a fairly high percentage of experienced teachers. Maybe you want to look at class size versus cost per pupil. And so, again, I don't know what this is going to find. I haven't looked at this before. But let's see if this brings something back. And I'm not sure why it's not bringing something back. Just try to refresh it. Maybe there's, okay. I go back to Discover, and to be honest, I can't remember exactly the two indicators I was looking at, but I think at this point you probably have the idea of how you can pick two indicators and what it shows you. So play around with this. Again, you want to keep an eye out on the correlation value to really understand if there's any indication of correlation. But again, it's a way for you to look for a school and find a school, for example, that has a large number of two different things or some relationship. So that's iExplorer. And so iExplorer and iPlatform are both tools that you can use to analyze data. And I encourage you to take a look at both of these and use these to try to find out more information about how your school's doing, understand what parents are looking at, and discover information about schools around the state. A couple of things I want to point out in the back of the PowerPoint. One I'll just show you in the PowerPoint just so you have this. Again, this might remind you of the things we went through so you can go try them yourself. I've also included here some activities for you, and so I highly recommend using these if you want to share this with other staff in your school. So this is an activity, again, you show them iPlatform and let them take a look at iPlatform. Have them look up their own school and have them find one thing that they're surprised about or one thing that they don't understand that hopefully you can explain, or you can send us an email and we'll help explain it for you. You might have them look at their school, another activity, and find out, look at one factor and see how your school, your district compares to the state. So it might be another exercise they do. A great activity that we have, which is now data that's available on iPlatform, is to fill out a spreadsheet or a table somewhat like this, something to this effect. And in here, what we've got is 3 years of data, 15, 16, 16, 17, 17, 18. And we're looking at the math results for grades 3 through 8. And so each row is grade 3, grade 4, grade 5, grade 6, grade 7, grade 8. Have them take a look at this specific example with these numbers. This is a real school. We did this exercise when we were bringing a school their data, and see what they find. See if there's any patterns or any questions that come out of looking at this data. Couple of things they may find. Grade 4 in 2015 didn't do very well and went down in 16, 17 and either further in 17, 18. And so this is a cohort of students. These are real kids that this school district might want to look at and make sure that these kids in 7th grade are not struggling or getting some additional support. When we did this exercise, it was actually back in the beginning of 2018-19, and so this was very recent data for them, or it was as recent as we could get. And another thing that people have noticed is that when we've done this exercise is that most cohorts seem to be going down. Here we got 63 to 57 to 54. Here we've got 50 to 48 to 26. I think there's just one cohort that might have gone up a little bit. So again, there's some indication within the school district that students are doing well up front, but they seem to be struggling with their math as they progress in the years. Another thing to point out is 8th grade across the board is fairly low, especially compared to where kids started back in the first years. So again, this certainly has some concerns for setting up these students of where they're going in 9th grade. And so, not to be critical of the school or anything, but really just to help the school have a dialogue, look at their data, and hopefully allow them to come up with some initiatives that might address concerns that they find. So I talk about this as an activity. You can now take a blank form, and we've got blank forms on our resources site, and have your own school, after they've looked at that, have them predict what they think they're going to find in your school, and then fill it out for your school or your district. And this next slide, I believe, tells you where you can get the data. So within the iReport, you can get the data by clicking on the student achievement and then clicking on the flyout, scrolling down and seeing the grade results. So this, you won't get the number of students, but you'll get the percent proficient. And you can do that for 17, 18, 18, 19. And if you want to go back 1 year, there's an old set of profiles that have some limited information, but it includes the test results. And so you can get that described here. So just another activity you might have your folks do to better use iPlatform and think about the data and make hopefully some action items that would be of value within your school. iExplorer, so we walked through iExplorer already. I just want to point out that that these slides exist, that there are also some activities here. So an example activity is go into iExplorer for 2018 and take the indicator of low SES, which is the percent of students economically disadvantaged, and find out which school had some of the highest SES, the highest number of students in poverty, but also had high performance. We looked at that a minute ago. But again, this could be a good activity for you to do with your staff. And then you might have them just consider an iExplorer indicator and how it impacts NHS for your school. Maybe identify another school that they think they'd want to reach out to. And then for iCompare, you might have them pick one school that they think is comparator, and we actually have this worksheet as well as on our resources on our website under this webinar. So they can reach out, they can fill out this worksheet to identify some differences between school that you might think is a comparator. And then finally for iDiscover, you might have them pick 2 indicators and just share out what they found and how they might want to follow up. So I think we are just about at the end of time. We'll just wait for a quick second to see if there's any questions, and I'm happy to show you anything addition that you want. Now, there's a question about that 4/5 year dropout rate before. That was when I was talking about the indicators. And so I should explain, because I think here the indicators showed graduation 4 and 5. So here you can look at at just the 4-year rate, and that means what percentage of your students graduated 4 years after they started 9th grade. So this is looking at all the kids who are in 9th grade, what percentage of them 4 years later had graduated. The 5-year rate is saying what percentage of your kids were able to graduate within 5 years after they started 9th grade. The 4/5 that your question is about, that's an indicator that's used when we go back to iPlatform. Just get there fairly quickly. Under iPlatform and under iReport, if I choose a school like Portsmouth High School, we'll see under federal accountability, one of the indicators is the graduation rate. This rate is an average of your 4 and 5 year. And that was just done as a requirement for the ESSA, for the federal requirement. And so the idea was not all students are going to graduate in 4 years. If you have a student graduate in 5 years, that's still a wonderful thing. And so from an accountability perspective, we're looking at an average, the state's looking at an average of your 4 and 5 year rates when it determines how you're doing from an accountability perspective. Thanks for that question. We'll just wait another minute and see if there's any other questions. Otherwise, please feel free to reach out to us. I'll put that slide back up anytime. And we certainly appreciate you taking the time to walk through the iPlatform. Okay, well, I guess we're done. So have a wonderful day and thanks again for your time. Take care.